Welcome, everyone. Today, we're jumping into a debate that might just flip everything you thought you knew about grammar completely upside down.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we all learn it in school, right? Nouns are things, verbs are actions. They're separate. But what if, in a language spoken by over a billion people, that whole distinction is just wrong?
Exactly. It seems so simple. A book is a noun, to read is a verb. Easy. But there's a really compelling theory in Chinese linguistics that says the super clear line we all take for granted, well, it might just be a grammatical illusion. So, to get our heads around this, here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with the traditional view, then introduce this radical new theory. After that, we'll dig into a fantastic critique by scholars Jin Xin and Wang Zongsheng to see how the arguments stack up. And finally, we'll get to the big one. Why does any of this matter in the real world? Okay, let's dive right in. Before we can really appreciate how wild this new idea is, we have to be crystal clear on the traditional way of thinking, the grammar rules that have been the standard for, well, a very long time. For decades, Chinese grammar, just like English grammar, has been built on this bedrock idea called noun-verb separation. It's exactly what it sounds like. Nouns and verbs are two completely separate boxes, they have different jobs to do in a sentence, and that's that. End of story. But then, a challenger entered the ring. A scholar named Shen Jack Swan came along and proposed a totally different way to look at the whole thing. It's a theory called noun-verb inclusion, and believe me, it really turns the old model on its head. Okay, so here's the bombshell. Get ready for it. The theory of noun-verb inclusion says that in Chinese, verbs aren't their own separate thing at all. Nope, they're just one type of noun. I love this slide because it shows you the shift so clearly. Look at the left. That's the old way. Two separate pillars, nouns and verbs. But on the right, the new theory says forget that. There's just one giant category, a supernoun. And inside that category, you have static nouns, which are just regular nouns, and dynamic nouns, which are what we've always been calling verbs. To help wrap your head around this, the theory gives a pretty great analogy. So instead of thinking about nouns and verbs as totally different things, like, say, cats and dogs, think of them more like men and women. Yeah, they have their differences, for sure, but they both fall under that one bigger, all-inclusive category of person. It's a really bold idea, you have to admit. But in science, how do we decide if a new theory is actually better than an old one? It can't just be about which one sounds cooler. There are actual established rules for this stuff. So, according to the philosophy of science, a really solid theory has to check a few boxes. It needs to be clear and make logical sense. It has to explain a lot of different things, not just one or two. And this next one is absolutely crucial. It has to be falsifiable. That just means there has to be some way to test it and potentially prove it wrong. Simplicity is nice, but it can't come at the cost of actually explaining how things work. And that question brings us right to the heart of the paper by Jin and Wang. They basically take this checklist and hold the noun-verb inclusion theory up to the light to see if it really passes the test. Okay, let's get into the evidence, the real nitty-gritty. The folks who support the inclusion theory point to 6 specific patterns in Chinese where verbs seem to act an awful lot like nouns, which they say proves they're all part of the same big family. Okay, let's break this down. The inclusion theory points to all these ways that nouns and verbs overlap. For example, they'll say, hey, verbs can be the subject of a sentence, which is usually a noun's job. See? They must be related.
Right, but the counter-argument from Jin and Wang is really sharp. They say, okay, fine, they overlap sometimes, but what about the things they don't share? For every example of overlap, they point to a feature that is exclusive to just one category, like the little word bu, which means not. It only works with verbs. You can't stick it in front of a noun.
Exactly. So the inclusion theory keeps pointing at all the shared family traits. And the critique keeps coming back with, yeah, but what about these unique DNA markers? They argue that those exclusive features are super strong evidence that nouns and verbs really are two different species, grammatically speaking. So beyond just looking at how words are used in sentences, the critique goes even deeper. It starts to pick apart the very logic of the theory itself, and even how it uses research from other linguists to back itself up. The paper basically accuses the theory of something called begging the question, or circular reasoning. It's like this. You start by defining nouns in a certain way. You notice that verbs sometimes fit that definition, and then you declare, aha, verbs are nouns. The critique is that you kind of rig the game from the start by choosing your definition carefully. And this is where the debate gets really academic, but it's fascinating. The noun-verb inclusion theory leans heavily on the work of a famous linguist, Richard Larson, and his idea of supernominals. But the big question Jin and Wang ask is, are they even interpreting his work correctly? To get this, we have to quickly talk about something called an azafe construction. Don't worry, it's not that complicated. It's a feature in languages like Persian, where a tiny particle connects a noun to the word describing it. Think of it like the of in The King of England. That little of is doing the linking job. Larson's theory was built on languages like that. And this is the knockout punch of the critique. Jin and Wang make two huge points. First, they say Larson talked about words being supernominal, meaning they have noun-like qualities. It's an adjective, a description. He never, ever proposed an actual category called a supernoun. Second, and this is the big one, when Larson made his list of things that could act noun-like, he never included verbs. So the paper argues that taking his concept and applying it to verbs isn't building on his work. It's inventing something totally new and just putting his name on it. So, okay, after all this talk about grammar and logic and academic citations, you're probably wondering, why should I care, right? What difference does any of this make in the real world? Well, the paper argues it matters a whole lot, especially if you're trying to learn Chinese. For a student, that clear line between what a noun does and what a verb does is like a lifeline. It's a simple rule you can grab onto. If you erase that line, the paper says, you're just creating a ton of confusion. Just think about it. When you're learning a new language, you need clear rules. You learn that verbs are the words you can add tense markers to. You learn that nouns are the words that need those little classifier words before them. These are the practical signposts that guide you. The paper's final point is that the noun-verb inclusion theory, as interesting as it is, basically takes down all those helpful road signs, leaving learners lost in the woods. So, in the end, we're left with this huge question that's way bigger than just Chinese grammar. Is language a nice, tidy system of neat little boxes we can label and sort? Or is it more of a messy, beautiful, chaotic reality where all the colors bleed into one another? This whole debate isn't just about what a verb is. It's really asking us to think about the true nature of language itself. And that is definitely something we're thinking about.